In the 1940s and 50s, seniors living alone knew how to make five-ingredient suppers that mattered. Their work wasn't fancy cooking. Creamed chipped beef on toast, egg and potato hash fed them for pennies. These 30 forgotten five-ingredient suppers might sound too plain today, but they kept seniors alive. Let's rediscover them before they disappear forever. In the 1940s, a creamed chipped beef on toast, affectionately called SOS by military families, was the ultimate cheap, filling supper for seniors living alone. This dish required only 5 ingredients: dried chipped beef, sold in glass jars, butter, flour, milk, and bread. Seniors would tear the salty dried beef into small pieces, make a simple white sauce by melting butter, whisking in flour, and slowly adding milk until it thickened. Then fold in the beef and heat it through. A salty mixture was spooned over toasted bread, which soaked up the sauce and turned soft and flavorful. Cost per serving was under 25 cents. The dish provided protein from the beef, calcium from the milk, and carbohydrates from the bread. It was warm, filling, and required only 1 pot and 1 plate. Seniors who grew up during the Depression or had family in the military knew this recipe by heart. Today, creamed chipped beef has nearly vanished, but in the 1940s, it mattered. It kept seniors fed, warm, and independent. In the 1950s, creamed tuna on toast was a fast, cheap supper seniors living alone could make in under 10 minutes. This dish used 5 simple ingredients: canned tuna, packed in water or oil, butter, flour, milk, and bread. Seniors would drain the tuna, make a basic white sauce by melting butter in a small saucepan, whisking in flour to form a roux, then slowly adding milk while stirring until the sauce thickened. They'd fold in the flaked tuna, season with a pinch of salt and pepper, and heat it through. The creamy tuna mixture was spooned over toasted bread, creating a warm, protein-rich meal that cost under 30 cents. The tuna provided complete protein and omega-3 fatty acids, the milk added calcium, and the bread offered carbohydrates for energy. This was comfort food that didn't require planning. If you had a can of tuna and some bread, you had supper. Seniors who lived through rationing knew how to stretch canned goods into real meals. Today, creamed tuna on toast has disappeared, replaced by tuna melts and sandwiches, but it once mattered deeply to people eating alone. In the 1940s and 50s, sardines on buttered toast was a no-cook supper seniors living alone made when they were too tired to stand at the stove. This meal required only 4 ingredients: canned sardines, packed in oil or mustard sauce, bread, and butter, and a squeeze of lemon or a slice of onion if they had it. Seniors would toast the bread, spread it thickly with butter while it was still warm, then lay the sardines, straight from the can, on top. The oil from the sardines mixed with the melted butter, soaking into the toast. Some added a sprinkle of salt or a thin slice of raw onion for sharpness. Cost per serving was under 20 cents. Sardines were one of the cheapest sources of protein, calcium from the soft bones, and omega-3 fatty acids. The meal was filling, required no cooking, and left only 1 plate to wash. Seniors who grew up in fishing communities or immigrant households knew sardines as a staple, not a novelty. Today, sardines on toast is seen as trendy or ironic, but in the 1940s and 50s, it was survival food that mattered. 3 down. But before we continue, many of you asked in the comments where to find these recipes. We even received tons of email too, so we published these recipes on our website. The link is in the description. Let's continue. In the 1940s and 50s, creamed salmon on toast was a step up from tuna, slightly more expensive but still affordable for seniors living alone. This dish used 5 ingredients: canned salmon, pink or red, butter, flour, milk, and bread. Seniors would drain the salmon, pick through it to remove any bones or skin, though many left the soft bones in for calcium, then make a white sauce by melting butter, whisking in flour, and slowly adding milk until smooth and thick. They'd fold in the flaked salmon, heat it gently, and spoon it over toasted bread. Cost per serving was around 40 cents, more than tuna, but still cheap. The salmon provided high-quality protein, omega-3s, and calcium from the bones. The creamy sauce made the meal feel rich and satisfying. Seniors often made this on Fridays or for a special weeknight supper when they wanted something that felt a little fancy without costing much. The dish was warm, filling, and elegant in its simplicity. Today, creamed salmon has vanished from most tables, but it once mattered to seniors who wanted dignity and flavor in their solo suppers. In the 1950s and 60s, deviled ham on toast was a 5-minute supper seniors living alone made straight from the pantry. This meal required only 4 ingredients: canned deviled ham, a spiced, spreadable meat paste sold by Underwood, bread, butter, and optional lettuce or mustard. Seniors would toast the bread, spread it with butter, then spread a thick layer of deviled ham on top. Some added a leaf of lettuce or a smear of yellow mustard for sharpness. The deviled ham was salty, spicy, and rich. A little went a long way. Cost per serving was under 30 cents. The ham provided protein and fat, and the bread offered carbohydrates. This was a meal you could make without turning on the stove, without dirtying a pan, and without any cooking skill. Seniors kept cans of deviled ham in the cupboard for nights when they were too tired or too lonely to cook a real meal. And the dish didn't require an appetite. It was easy to eat, easy to swallow, and filling enough to get through the evening. Today, deviled ham is mostly forgotten, but it once mattered to seniors who needed supper without effort. Creamed chipped beef, creamed tuna, sardines on buttered toast, creamed salmon, deviled ham, 5 on-toast suppers seniors made in under 10 minutes for pennies. Each one was warm, filling, and required almost no cleanup, not shortcuts, but smart survival. Let's keep going. 5 more on-toast suppers are waiting. In the 1940s and 50s, creamed peas on toast was a meatless supper seniors living alone made when they had no protein in the house. This dish used 5 ingredients: canned peas, or frozen if they had a freezer, butter, flour, milk, and bread. Seniors would drain the peas, make a white sauce by melting butter, whisking in flour, and slowly adding milk until it thickened, then stir in the peas and heat them through. The creamy green mixture was spooned over toasted bread, creating a warm, gentle supper that cost under 20 cents. Peas provided plant-based protein, fiber, and vitamins A and C. The milk added calcium, and the bread offered carbohydrates. This was a meal you could make when the cupboard was nearly bare. Seniors who grew up during the Depression remembered eating creamed peas, or creamed anything, on toast as a way to stretch ingredients and fill the stomach. The dish was soft, easy to eat, and comforting in its simplicity. Today, creamed peas on toast is almost unheard of, but it once mattered to seniors who needed a warm supper without meat, without money, and without fuss. In the 1950s and 60s, egg salad on toast was a cold supper seniors living alone made when it was too hot to cook or too late to bother. This dish required only 5 ingredients: hard-boiled eggs, mayonnaise, bread, salt, and pepper. Seniors would boil a few eggs in advance, peel them, chop them roughly with a fork, and mix them with a spoonful of mayonnaise and a pinch of salt and pepper. The egg salad was spread thickly on toasted or untoasted bread. Cost per serving was under 15 cents. Eggs provided complete protein, healthy fats, and vitamins D and B12. The mayonnaise added richness and calories. This was a meal that could be made ahead and kept in the refrigerator, ready to eat whenever hunger struck. Seniors living alone appreciated egg salad because it didn't require reheating, didn't need a stove, and didn't leave them standing in a hot kitchen. It was cool, creamy, and filling. Today, egg salad sandwiches are still around, but the simplicity of egg salad on toast, no second slice, no wrapping, just eat, has mostly vanished. It once mattered to seniors who wanted supper without ceremony. In the 1950s and 60s, fried bologna on toast was a quick, savory supper seniors living alone made when they wanted something warm and meaty without much effort. This dish required only 4 ingredients: bologna, thick-sliced if possible, bread, butter, and optional mustard. Seniors would heat a skillet, toss in a pat of butter, and fry thick slices of bologna until the edges curled and the surface caramelized. They'd toast the bread, spread it with butter or mustard, and lay the hot, crispy bologna on top. The fat from the bologna soaked into the toast, making it rich and flavorful. Cost per serving was under 30 cents. Bologna provided protein and fat. Though not the healthiest, it was filling. The dish was warm, salty, and satisfying, like a deconstructed sandwich. Seniors who grew up working class knew fried bologna as a staple, not a joke. It was cheap, shelf-stable, and tasted like real food. Today, fried bologna is mostly a nostalgic novelty, but in the 1950s and 60s, it mattered to seniors who wanted a hot supper without fuss, without waste, and without pretending to be something they weren't. In the 1940s through the 60s, scrambled eggs on toast was the simplest hot supper a senior living alone could make. This dish required only 4 ingredients: eggs, bread, butter, and salt. Seniors would crack 2 eggs into a bowl, whisk them with a splash of milk or water and a pinch of salt, and then scramble them gently in a buttered skillet over low heat until they were soft and creamy. The eggs were spooned over toasted buttered bread. Cost per serving was under 15 cents. Eggs provided complete protein, healthy fats, and essential vitamins. The bread soaked up the soft eggs, making every bite satisfying. This was a meal you could make in 5 minutes, with 1 pan, 1 plate, and no planning. Seniors who lived alone often ate scrambled eggs on toast for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. It didn't matter when. It was always good. The dish was warm, gentle, and easy to digest. Today, scrambled eggs are still common, but the simplicity of eating them on toast, no sides, no garnish, just eggs and bread, has faded. It once mattered to seniors who needed supper that was fast, cheap, warm, and kind to an aging body. In the 1940s and 50s, tomato gravy on toast was a Southern and Appalachian supper seniors living alone made when there was no meat in the house. This dish required only 5 ingredients: canned tomatoes or tomato sauce, butter, flour, milk, and bread. Seniors would melt butter in a skillet, whisk in flour to make a roux, then add canned tomatoes, crushed or whole, broken up with a spoon, and a splash of milk to create a thick, tangy, creamy gravy. The tomato gravy was spooned over toasted bread. On cost per serving was under 20 cents. The tomatoes provided vitamin C and acidity, the milk added calcium and creaminess, and the bread soaked up the gravy like a sponge. This was comfort food born of necessity. No meat, no vegetables, just what was in the pantry. Seniors who grew up in the rural South knew tomato gravy as a staple of poor kitchens and they carried that knowledge into old age. The dish was warm, tangy, filling, and deeply satisfying. Today, tomato gravy is almost unknown outside the South, but it once mattered to seniors who needed supper that tasted like home even when there was nothing left to cook. Creamed peas, egg salad, fried bologna, scrambled eggs, tomato gravy, 5 more on-toast suppers that fed seniors living alone with almost nothing. 10 suppers down, each one warm, cheap, and filling. Not poverty food, but survival food with dignity. 20 more 5-ingredient suppers are waiting. Let's keep going. In the 1940s and 50s, egg and potato supper hash was a 1-skillet meal seniors living alone made when they had a few potatoes and eggs left in the kitchen. This dish required only 5 ingredients: potatoes, eggs, onion, butter, and salt. Seniors would peel and dice the potatoes into small cubes, chop half an onion, then heat a generous pat of butter in a cast-iron skillet. They'd add the potatoes and onion, season with salt, and fry them over medium heat, stirring occasionally until the potatoes were golden brown and crispy on the outside, tender on the inside. This took about 20 minutes. Once the potatoes were cooked, they'd crack 2 or 3 eggs directly into the skillet, breaking the yolks and scrambling everything together until the eggs were cooked through. The result was a warm, hearty, savory hash that filled the plate and the stomach. Cost per serving was under 30 cents. Potatoes provided complex carbohydrates and fiber. The eggs delivered complete protein and healthy fats, and the onion added flavor and a bit of vitamin C. This was a meal that required no recipe, no planning, and no fancy skills, just patience and a hot skillet. Seniors who lived through the Depression knew that potatoes and eggs could carry you through hard times. The dish was filling, warming, and satisfying. It didn't look fancy, but it tasted like real food. Today, breakfast hashes are trendy brunch items, but the simple supper hash, made alone, and in one pan for one person, has mostly vanished. In the 1950s, sausage and fried potatoes was a classic 1-pan supper seniors living alone made when they wanted something hearty and meaty without much effort. This dish required only 5 ingredients: pork sausage links, or patties, potatoes, onion, butter, and salt. Seniors would slice the sausages into thick rounds, peel and dice the potatoes, and chop half an onion. They'd heat a skillet, add a pat of butter, and brown the sausage pieces first, letting the fat render out and flavor the pan. Once the sausages were browned, they'd push them to the side, add the diced potatoes and onion to the same skillet, season with salt, and fry everything together, stirring occasionally, until the potatoes were crispy and golden and the onions were soft and caramelized. The sausage fat coated the potatoes, making them rich and flavorful. Cost per serving was around 50 cents. Sausage provided protein and fat, while potatoes offered carbohydrates and fiber, and the onion added sweetness and vitamins. This was a meal that tasted like comfort, savory, salty, filling, and warm. Seniors appreciated that everything cooked in one pan, which meant less cleanup and less standing at the stove. The dish was also flexible. You could use whatever sausage was on sale, and if you had leftover boiled potatoes, they fried up even faster. Today, sausage and potatoes are still around, but the simplicity of frying them together in one pan for a solo supper has faded. Long. In the 1950s and 60s, fried bologna and eggs was a quick, cheap, 1-skillet supper seniors living alone made when they wanted protein and fat without fuss. This dish required only 4 ingredients: thick-sliced bologna, eggs, butter, and salt. Seniors would heat a skillet, add a pat of butter, And fry the bologna slices until the edges curled up and the surface turned crispy and caramelized. The bologna released its own fat, flavoring the pan. Once the bologna was browned, they'd push it to the side or remove it to a plate, crack 2 or 3 eggs into the same skillet, and fry them sunny side up or scrambled, depending on preference. The eggs cooked in the bologna fat and butter, soaking up all that savory flavor. The fried bologna and eggs were served together on one plate, sometimes with a slice of bread on the side to soak up the runny yolk. Cost per serving was under 30 cents. Bologna provided protein and fat, though heavily processed, and eggs delivered complete protein, healthy fats, and vitamins. This was a meal that tasted indulgent, salty, rich, filling, even though it cost almost nothing. Seniors who grew up working class knew fried bologna as real food, not a joke. It was cheap, shelf-stable, and satisfying. In the 1940s and 50s, ground beef and onion skillet was a bare-bones supper seniors living alone made when they had a small amount of ground beef and needed to stretch it into a full meal. This dish required only 5 ingredients: ground beef, often just a quarter or half pound, onion, flour, water, and salt. Seniors would heat a skillet, crumble the ground beef into it, and brown it over medium heat, breaking it up with a spoon. Once the beef was cooked through, they'd add a chopped onion and cook it until soft and golden. Then they'd sprinkle in a tablespoon or 2 of flour, stirring it into the meat and onions to create a roux. Slowly they'd add water, about a cup, stirring constantly until the mixture thickened into a savory, beefy gravy. They'd season with salt and pepper and let it simmer for a few minutes. The result was a thick, meaty sauce that could be eaten over bread, toast, rice, or boiled potatoes. Cost per serving was around 40 cents. Ground beef provided protein and iron, the onion added flavor and vitamins, and the flour-thickened gravy made a little meat go a long way. This was Depression-era cooking carried forward into the 1950s. Stretch, season, and simmer until it tastes like something. Seniors who lived through hard times knew that you didn't need a pound of meat to make supper feel substantial. Today, this kind of simple beef and gravy skillet has mostly disappeared. It is replaced by boxed hamburger helpers and frozen dinners. But it once mattered to seniors who needed a hot, filling meal from almost nothing. In the 1950s and 60s, hot dogs and fried potatoes was a classic one-pan supper seniors living alone made when they wanted something quick, cheap, and filling. This dish required only 5 ingredients: hot dogs, franks, potatoes, onion, butter, and salt. Seniors would slice the hot dogs into thick rounds, peel and dice the potatoes into small cubes, and chop half an onion. They'd heat a skillet, add a generous pat of butter, and fry the potatoes first, seasoning them with salt and stirring occasionally until they were golden and crispy, about 15 to 20 minutes. Once the potatoes were nearly done, they'd add the sliced hot dogs and chopped onion to the same skillet, and continue cooking until the hot dogs were browned and the onions were soft. The hot dog fat mixed with the butter, coating the potatoes and making everything savory and rich. Cost per serving was under 40 cents. Hot dogs provided protein, though processed, potatoes offered carbohydrates and fiber, and the onion added sweetness and vitamins. This was a meal that tasted like childhood, simple, salty, comforting, and it required only 1 pan and about 30 minutes from start to finish. Seniors appreciated that hot dogs were cheap, shelf-stable, or easy to keep in the fridge, and didn't require any preparation beyond slicing. The dish was also flexible. You could add a can of beans, a splash of ketchup, or whatever else was in the cupboard. Today, hot dogs and fried potatoes are still around, but the tradition of cooking them together in one skillet for a solo supper has faded. It once mattered to seniors who needed a warm, filling meal without fuss or waste. Egg and potato hash, sausage and fried potatoes, fried bologna and eggs, and ground beef and onion skillet, hot dogs and fried potatoes. 5 one-skillet suppers seniors made when they had almost nothing. Everyone cooked in one pan, cost under 50 cents, and filled the stomach. Not fancy, but real. 5 more skillet suppers are waiting. In the 1940s and 50s, corned beef hash skillet was a one-pan supper seniors living alone made when they had a can of corned beef and a few potatoes in the cupboard. This dish required only 5 ingredients: canned corned beef, potatoes, onion, butter, and salt. Seniors would peel and dice the potatoes into small cubes, chop half an onion, and open the can of corned beef. They'd heat a cast-iron skillet, add a pat of butter, and fry the diced potatoes and onion together, seasoning with salt, until the potatoes were golden and crispy, and the onions were soft and caramelized. About 20 minutes. Once the potatoes were cooked, they'd add the canned corned beef, breaking it up with a spoon and mixing it into the potatoes. The corned beef was already cooked and seasoned, so it just needed to heat through and brown slightly. The result was a savory, salty, hearty hash that filled the plate and the stomach. Cost per serving was around 50 cents. Corned beef provided protein and fat, potatoes offered carbohydrates and fiber, and the onion added flavor and vitamins. This was a meal that tasted substantial, like something you'd order in a diner, but cost almost nothing and took less than 30 minutes to make. Seniors who lived through the Depression knew canned corned beef as a staple, and by the 1940s and 50s, it had become a go-to ingredient for quick-filling suppers. Today, corned beef hash is still available in cans, but the tradition of making it fresh in a skillet from canned beef and potatoes has mostly vanished. It once mattered to seniors who needed a meal that felt abundant without costing much. In the 1940s and 50s, cabbage and sausage fry was a cheap, filling, one-pan supper seniors living alone made when they had half a cabbage and a few sausages on hand. This dish required only 5 ingredients: cabbage, pork sausage links, or kielbasa, onion, butter, and salt. Seniors would slice the cabbage into thick ribbons, chop half an onion, and slice the sausages into thick rounds. They'd heat a large skillet, add a pat of butter, and brown the sausage pieces first, letting the fat render out and flavor the pan. Once the sausages were browned, they'd push them to the side, add the sliced cabbage and onion to the same skillet, season with salt, and cook everything together over medium heat, stirring occasionally until the cabbage wilted and caramelized and the onions turned soft and golden. This took about 20 minutes. The sausage fat coated the cabbage, making it rich and savory. Cost per serving was under 40 cents. Sausage provided protein and fat, cabbage offered fiber, vitamins C and K, and very few calories, and the onion added sweetness and flavor. This was a meal that tasted hearty and warming, especially in winter. Seniors appreciated that cabbage was one of the cheapest vegetables you could buy, and a small head lasted for days. The dish was also forgiving. You could use any sausage, add a splash of vinegar for tang, or throw in a few caraway seeds for flavor. Today, cabbage and sausage is still cooked in some households, but the simplicity of frying them together in one pan for a solo supper has faded. It once mattered to seniors who needed a meal that stretched cheap ingredients into something satisfying and warm. Was a one-pot supper seniors, living alone made, when they had a little ground beef and needed to stretch it into a full meal. This dish required only 5 ingredients: ground beef, often just a quarter or half pound, rice, onion, water, and salt. Seniors would heat a skillet, crumble the ground beef into it, and brown it over medium heat, breaking it up with a spoon. Once the beef was cooked through, they'd add a chopped onion and cook it until soft. And then they'd stir in uncooked white rice, about half a cup, and add 2 cups of water and a generous pinch of salt. They'd bring everything to a boil, then reduce the heat, cover the skillet, and let it simmer for about 20 minutes until the rice absorbed all the liquid and turned tender and fluffy. The result was a savory one-pot meal where the rice soaked up all the beefy flavor. Cost per serving was under 50 cents. Ground beef provided protein and iron. Our rice offered carbohydrates and energy, and the onion added flavor and vitamins. This was a meal that felt substantial, like something a family would eat, but could be made in one pan for one person. Seniors appreciated that the dish required minimal cleanup and no side dishes. Today, hamburger and rice is still cooked in some homes, but the tradition of making it in one skillet for one person with just 5 ingredients has mostly faded. It once mattered to seniors who needed a hot, filling supper that stretched a little meat into something that felt like enough. In the 1950s and 60s, beans and hot dog fry-up was a cheap, filling, one-pan supper seniors living alone made when they had a can of baked beans and a few hot dogs in the refrigerator. This dish required only 5 ingredients: canned baked beans, hot dogs, onion, ketchup or brown sugar, and mustard. Seniors would slice the hot dogs into thick rounds and chop half an onion. They'd heat a skillet, add the sliced hot dogs, and fry them until they were browned and slightly crispy. Then they'd add the chopped onion and cook it until soft. Once the onion was tender, they'd dump in a can of baked beans, sometimes 2 cans if they were hungry. Stir in a spoonful of ketchup or a sprinkle of brown sugar for sweetness, and a dollop of mustard for tang. Everything would simmer together for about 10 minutes until the beans were hot and the flavors melded. The result was a sweet, savory, hearty dish that tasted like summer cookouts. Cost per serving was under 40 cents. Beans provided plant-based protein, fiber, and complex carbohydrates. Hot dogs added meat protein, though processed, and the onion contributed vitamins. This was a meal that required almost no effort. Open a can, slice some hot dogs, stir, and eat. Seniors appreciated that it was filling, cheap, and comforting. Today, beans and hot dogs are still eaten, but the tradition of frying them together in one skillet for a solo supper has mostly faded. It once mattered to seniors who needed a warm, filling meal that tasted like home without costing much or taking long. In the 1940s and 50s, potato and onion supper skillet was the simplest one-pan meal a senior living alone could make, just 2 main ingredients and butter. This dish required only 4 ingredients: potatoes, onion, butter, and salt. Seniors would peel and slice the potatoes into thin rounds, slice an onion into rings or half-moons, then heat a cast-iron skillet and add a generous amount of butter. They'd layer the potato slices and onion rings in the skillet, season each layer with salt, and cook everything over medium-low heat, covered for about 20 to 30 minutes, flipping occasionally until the potatoes were tender and golden brown and the onions were caramelized and sweet. The butter and onion created a rich, savory coating on the potatoes. Cost per serving was under 20 cents. Potatoes provided complex carbohydrates, fiber, and potassium. Onions added vitamins C and B6 and a natural sweetness, and the butter contributed fat and calories. This was a meal that didn't pretend to be anything fancy. It was just potatoes and onions, fried together, eaten warm. Seniors who lived through the Depression knew that potatoes and onions were the backbone of survival cooking. The dish was filling, comforting, and deeply satisfying. It didn't need meat, didn't need a recipe, didn't need anything but time and patience. Corned beef hash, cabbage and sausage fry, hamburger and rice skillet, beans and hot dog fry-up, potato and onion supper, 5 more one-pan suppers seniors made when the cupboard was nearly bare, 20 suppers down, each one cooked in 1 skillet, cost under 50 cents, and filled the stomach. 10 pantry suppers are waiting. In the 1950s and 60s, tomato soup and grilled cheese was the ultimate comfort supper for seniors living alone. Warm, filling, and made with just 5 ingredients from the pantry and refrigerator. This meal required Campbell's condensed tomato soup, milk, bread, cheese, usually American or cheddar, and butter. Seniors would open a can of Campbell's tomato soup, dump it into a small saucepan, add 1 can of milk, the empty soup can served as the measuring cup, and heat it over medium heat, stirring occasionally until it was hot and smooth. While the soup warmed, they'd make the grilled cheese, butter 2 slices of bread on one side, place a slice or 2 of cheese between the unbuttered sides, and fry the sandwich in a hot skillet, flipping once until both sides were golden brown and the cheese was melted. The grilled cheese was cut in half and served alongside the bowl of hot tomato soup. Many seniors dunked the sandwich into the soup, all letting the bread soak up the creamy tomato flavor. Cost per serving was under 50 cents. The soup provided vitamins A and C from the tomatoes, calcium from the milk, and warmth that soothed the stomach. The grilled cheese added protein from the cheese, carbohydrates from the bread, and fat from the butter. This was a meal that required no recipe, no planning, and no thinking. It was muscle memory. These seniors who grew up during the Depression knew that Campbell's tomato soup and a grilled cheese sandwich could carry you through a long, cold evening. The combination was iconic, comforting, and deeply satisfying. It didn't need sides, didn't need garnish, didn't need anything else. Today, tomato soup and grilled cheese is still around, but it's often seen as a kid's meal or a nostalgic novelty rather than a legitimate supper for adults. In the 1950s and 60s, though, it mattered. It was what seniors living alone ate when they were tired, when they were lonely, when they didn't have the energy to cook anything complicated. In the 1940s and 50s, baked beans and toast was a cheap, filling, no-cook supper seniors living alone made when they were too tired to stand at the stove. And this meal required only 3 ingredients: canned baked beans, bread, and butter. Seniors would open a can of baked beans, usually pork and beans, or vegetarian beans in tomato sauce, and heat them in a small saucepan over low heat, stirring occasionally, until they were hot and bubbling. Some didn't bother heating them at all and ate them straight from the can, cold. While the beans heated, they'd toast a few slices of bread and spread them thickly with butter. The hot beans were spooned over the toast, or the toast was served on the side for dipping. Cost per serving was under 20 cents. Baked beans provided plant-based protein, fiber, complex carbohydrates, and iron. The molasses or brown sugar in the beans added sweetness and calories. The bread offered more carbohydrates, and the butter contributed fat and richness. This was a meal that required almost no effort, almost no time, and almost no money. Seniors appreciated that beans were shelf-stable, cheap, and filling. A single can could stretch into 2 meals if necessary. The dish was also comforting in its simplicity. Warm, sweet, savory, soft. Seniors who grew up during the Depression remembered eating beans on toast as a staple of hard times, and by the 1940s and 50s, it had become a quiet go-to supper for elderly people living alone. The meal didn't look fancy, didn't taste fancy, but it kept you full and warm through the evening. Today, beans on toast is mostly associated with British cuisine, but it was once a common American supper, especially among working-class and elderly people. It has largely vanished from American tables, replaced by frozen dinners and takeout. But in the 1940s and 50s, it mattered. It was what seniors ate when there was nothing else, when the cupboard was nearly bare. In the 1950s and 60s, macaroni with butter and cheese was a simple, cheap supper seniors living alone made when they had a box of pasta and a bit of cheese in the refrigerator. This wasn't boxed Kraft macaroni and cheese, it was even simpler. This dish required only 4 ingredients: elbow macaroni, butter, cheese, usually cheddar or American, and salt. Seniors would boil the macaroni in salted water until it was tender, drain it, and return it to the pot. While the pasta was still hot, they'd stir in a generous pat of butter, letting it melt and coat every piece of macaroni. Then they'd add grated or torn pieces of cheese, stirring until the cheese melted into the butter and pasta, creating a creamy, cheesy coating. Some added a splash of milk to make it creamier. The result was a bowl of warm, buttery, cheesy macaroni that cost under 30 cents and took less than 15 minutes to make. Macaroni provided carbohydrates for energy, butter added fat and richness, and cheese contributed protein, calcium, and flavor. This was a meal that required no recipe, no measuring, no thinking, just boil, drain, stir, and eat. Seniors appreciated that it was fast, filling, and comforting. It tasted like childhood, like home, like something a mother would make. Today, boxed macaroni and cheese is still popular, but the tradition of making it from scratch with just butter, cheese, and pasta has mostly faded. In the 1950s and 60s, though, it mattered. It was what seniors living alone ate when they needed something warm and comforting, but didn't have the energy or appetite for a full meal. The dish was gentle on the stomach, easy to chew, and deeply satisfying. It didn't require meat, didn't require vegetables, didn't require anything but a pot, a box of pasta, and a little bit of cheese. It was simple, it was cheap, it was filling, and it was enough. For seniors who lived through hard times and knew how to stretch ingredients. In the 1940s through the 60s, rice with fried egg was a cheap supper seniors living alone made when they had leftover rice or a handful of uncooked rice and a few eggs in the refrigerator. This dish required only 4 ingredients: white rice, eggs, butter, and salt. Seniors would cook the rice in salted water until it was tender and fluffy, then drain it and set it aside. If they had leftover rice from a previous meal, they'd skip this step and just reheat it. They'd heat a skillet, add a pat of butter, and fry 1 or 2 eggs sunny side up or over easy, so the yolk stayed runny. The fried eggs were placed on top of a bowl of warm rice. When the diner broke the yolk with a fork, it would run into the rice, coating every grain with rich golden yolk. Some seniors added a sprinkle of salt and pepper, a dash of soy sauce if they had it, or a pat of extra butter on the rice. Cost per serving was under 20 cents. Rice provided carbohydrates for energy. Eggs delivered complete protein, unhealthy fats and vitamins, and the butter added richness and calories. This was a meal that required minimal effort, minimal ingredients, and minimal cleanup. 1 pot for the rice, 1 pan for the egg, 1 bowl to eat from. Seniors appreciated that rice was cheap, filling, and easy to digest. Eggs added protein and turned plain rice into a real meal. The dish was warm, satisfying, and comforting in its simplicity. Today, our rice with fried egg is still eaten in some cultures and has even become trendy in certain circles, but the tradition of eating it as a solo supper, plain, simple, no garnish, no sides, has mostly faded in American homes. In the 1940s through the 60s, though, in the 1950s and 60s, creamed corn and eggs was a soft, sweet, savory supper seniors living alone made when they had a can of creamed corn and a few eggs in the kitchen. This dish required only 4 ingredients: canned creamed corn, eggs, butter, and salt. Seniors would open the can of creamed corn and heat it in a small saucepan over low heat, stirring occasionally until it was hot and bubbling. While the corn heated, they'd crack 2 or 3 eggs into a bowl, whisk them with a pinch of salt, then scramble them gently in a buttered skillet over low heat until they were soft and creamy. Once both the corn and eggs were cooked, They'd serve them together on one plate, sometimes mixed together, sometimes side by side. The sweetness of the creamed corn balanced the richness of the scrambled eggs, creating a comforting, gentle meal. Cost per serving was under 30 cents. Creamed corn provided carbohydrates, fiber, and a bit of vitamin C, though much of the nutritional value was processed out. Eggs delivered complete protein, healthy fats, and essential vitamins. The butter added richness and calories. This was a meal that was soft, easy to chew, and easy to digest. Perfect for seniors with dental problems or sensitive stomachs. The dish required minimal effort, minimal cleanup, and no planning. Seniors appreciated that canned creamed corn was shelf-stable and cheap, and eggs were always on hand. The combination was unexpected but comforting, sweet and savory, soft and filling. Today, creamed corn and eggs is almost unheard of, but in the 1950s and 60s, it mattered. It was what seniors living alone ate when they needed something warm and gentle but didn't have the energy to cook a full meal. The dish was humble, simple, and kind to an aging body. It didn't require chewing tough meat, didn't irritate the stomach, and didn't leave you feeling heavy or bloated. It was just creamed corn and eggs, soft, warm, filling, and enough. For seniors who lived through hard times and knew how to make something out of almost nothing, this dish was a quiet act of survival and self-care. Tomato soup and grilled cheese, baked beans and toast, macaroni with butter and cheese, rice with fried egg, creamed corn and eggs, 5 cheap pantry suppers seniors made when they were too tired to cook anything complicated. Each one cost under 50 cents, took under 20 minutes, and filled the stomach. In the 1940s and 50s, simple pantry-style potato soup was a warm, filling one. Pot supper seniors living alone made when they had a few potatoes, some milk, and butter. This dish required only 5 ingredients: potatoes, onion, milk, butter, and salt. Seniors would peel and dice 3 or 4 potatoes into small cubes, chop half an onion, and put everything into a pot with enough water to cover. They'd bring the water to a boil, then reduce the heat and simmer until the potatoes were soft and falling apart, about 20 minutes. Once the potatoes were tender, they'd mash some of them right in the pot with a fork or potato masher, leaving some chunks for texture. Then they'd stir in a cup or 2 of milk and a tablespoon of butter, season with salt and pepper, and heat the soup gently until it was hot and creamy. The result was a thick, comforting soup that tasted like pure comfort. Cost per serving was under 30 cents. Potatoes provided complex carbohydrates, fiber and potassium. Milk added calcium and protein, and butter contributed fat and richness. The onion added flavor and a bit of vitamin C. This was a meal that required no fancy ingredients, no complicated techniques, and no recipe. Just peel, chop, boil, mash, and eat. Seniors appreciated that potato soup was filling, warming, and gentle on the stomach. It was easy to digest, easy to chew, and deeply satisfying. The dish also stretched cheap ingredients into multiple servings. 1 pot of soup could last for 2 or 3 meals. Today, potato soup is still around, but it's often loaded with bacon, cheese, sour cream, and other add-ins. The simple, honest version, just potatoes, onion, milk, butter, and salt, has mostly vanished. In the 1940s and 50s, though, it mattered. It was what seniors living alone ate when they needed something warm and filling but didn't have much money or energy to cook. The soup was humble, simple, and kind. It didn't pretend to be gourmet, didn't require fresh herbs or fancy garnishes, and didn't waste anything. It was just potatoes and milk simmered together until they turned into something nourishing. In the 1950s and 60s, canned chili over rice was a fast, cheap, filling supper seniors living alone made when they had a can of chili in the cupboard and some rice in the pantry. This dish required only 3 ingredients: canned chili, with or without beans, white rice, and water. Seniors would cook the rice in salted water until it was tender and fluffy, then drain it and set it aside. While the rice cooked, they'd open a can of chili and heat it in a small saucepan over medium heat, stirring occasionally, until it was hot and bubbling. Once both the rice and chili were ready, they'd spoon the rice into a bowl and ladle the hot chili over the top. Some added a pat of butter to the rice for richness, or a sprinkle of shredded cheese on top of the chili if they had it. But most ate it plain. Cost per serving was under 50 cents. Canned chili provided protein from the meat or beans, fiber, and plenty of flavor from the spices and tomatoes. Rice offered carbohydrates for energy and helped stretch the chili into a more filling meal. This was a supper that required almost no effort. Just open a can, cook some rice, heat, and eat. Seniors appreciated that canned chili was shelf-stable, cheap, and already seasoned. You didn't need to add anything, didn't need to think about it, didn't need to follow a recipe. It was ready to eat in under 20 minutes. The dish was warm, spicy, filling, and satisfying. Today, canned chili over rice is still eaten occasionally, but it's often seen as bachelor food or dorm room cooking rather than a legitimate meal. In the 1950s and 60s, though, it mattered. It was what seniors living alone ate when they wanted something hot and hearty, but didn't have the energy or appetite to cook from scratch. The dish was practical, efficient, and comforting in its simplicity. It didn't require fresh ingredients, didn't require chopping or sautéing, and didn't require standing at the stove for long. It was just rice and chili, two simple things that came together into something warm, filling. In the 1950s and 60s, buttered noodles with eggs was a simple, cheap one. Pot supper seniors living alone made when they had a box of egg noodles and a few eggs in the refrigerator. This dish required only 4 ingredients: egg noodles, eggs, butter, and salt. Seniors would boil the egg noodles in salted water until they were tender, then drain them and return them to the pot. While the noodles were still hot, they'd stir in a generous pat of butter, letting it melt and coat every strand. Then they'd crack 1 or 2 raw eggs directly into the hot noodles and stir quickly, letting the heat of the noodles cook the eggs into a creamy, silky coating. The result was a bowl of rich, buttery, eggy noodles that cost under 30 cents and took less than 15 minutes to make. Some seniors added a sprinkle of black pepper, a handful of grated cheese, or a dash of garlic powder for extra flavor, but most ate it plain. Egg noodles provided carbohydrates for energy. Butter added fat and richness, and the eggs contributed complete protein, healthy fats, and vitamins. This was a meal that required no recipe, no measuring, no thinking, just boil, drain, stir, and eat. Seniors appreciated that it was fast, filling, and comforting. The dish tasted like something a mother would make, something warm and kind and gentle. Today, buttered noodles are still around, but the technique of stirring raw eggs into hot noodles to create a creamy sauce has mostly faded in American cooking, though it remains popular in Italian carbonara. In the 1950s and 60s, though, it mattered. It was what seniors living alone ate when they needed something warm and comforting, but didn't have the energy or appetite for a full meal. The dish was soft, easy to chew, and easy to digest. It didn't require meat, didn't require vegetables, didn't require anything but a pot, a box of noodles, and a couple of eggs. It was simple, it was cheap, it was filling, and it was enough. For seniors who lived through hard times and knew how to stretch ingredients, buttered noodles with eggs was a quiet act of self-care. In the 1950s and 60s, cottage cheese and crackers plate was a cold, a no-cook supper seniors living alone made when it was too hot to cook, too late to bother, or they simply didn't have the energy. This meal required only 3 ingredients: cottage cheese, saltine crackers, and salt and pepper. Seniors would scoop a generous portion of cottage cheese, usually small curd, into a bowl, season it with a pinch of salt and a few grinds of black pepper, and serve it alongside a stack of saltine crackers. Some added a sliced tomato, a few cucumber slices, or a handful of canned peaches for variety, but most ate it plain. The cottage cheese was eaten with a spoon, and the crackers were used to scoop up bites, or eaten on the side for crunch. Cost per serving was under 30 cents. Cottage cheese provided high-quality protein, calcium, and probiotics for gut health. Saltines offered carbohydrates and a satisfying crunch. This was a meal that required zero cooking, zero cleanup beyond a bowl and spoon, and zero effort. Seniors appreciated that cottage cheese was cheap, easy to digest and filling. It didn't require chewing tough meat, didn't sit heavy in the stomach, and didn't leave you feeling bloated. The meal was light, refreshing, and simple. Today, cottage cheese and crackers is still eaten occasionally, but it's often seen as a diet food or a snack rather than a legitimate supper. In the 1950s and 60s, though, it mattered. It was what seniors living alone ate when they were too tired to cook, too hot to stand at the stove, or simply didn't have the appetite for a heavy meal. The dish was cool, gentle and kind to an aging body. It didn't pretend to be fancy, didn't require a recipe, and didn't waste anything. It was just cottage cheese and crackers, two simple things that came together into something nourishing, satisfying, and enough. For seniors who lived through hard times and knew how to take care of themselves with minimal resources, this dish was a quiet act. In the 1940s through the 60s, sardines and crackers supper was a cold, no-cook meal seniors living alone made when they were too tired to stand at the stove or simply wanted something fast and filling. This dish required only 3 ingredients: canned sardines, packed in oil, mustard sauce or tomato sauce, saltine crackers, and optional lemon, onion, or hot sauce. Seniors would open the can of sardines and drain off a bit of the oil if desired and eat the sardines straight from the can or arranged on a plate. Saltine crackers were served on the side. Some seniors placed a sardine on each cracker and ate them like little open-faced sandwiches, while others alternated bites of sardine and cracker. Some squeezed fresh lemon over the sardines for brightness, added a few slices of raw onion for sharpness, or splashed on hot sauce for heat, but most ate them plain. Cost per serving was under 25 cents. Sardines were one of the cheapest, most nutrient-dense foods available, packed with complete protein, omega-3 fatty acids, calcium from the soft bones, vitamin D, and iron. Saltines provided carbohydrates and a satisfying crunch. This was a meal that required zero cooking, zero cleanup beyond a fork and plate, and zero effort. Seniors appreciated that sardines were shelf-stable, cheap, and filling. A single can could serve as a full meal or stretch into 2 servings if paired with crackers and a piece of fruit. The dish was also portable. You could eat it anywhere, anytime. 35-ingredient supper. 30 meals that mattered when money was tight, when energy was low, when living alone meant cooking for one with whatever was left in the cupboard: creamed chipped beef on toast, egg and potato hash, tomato soup and grilled cheese, sardines and crackers. These weren't shortcuts, they were survival skills. Seniors in the 1940s through the 60s knew how to feed themselves with 5 ingredients or less: 1 pan, 1 plate, and no waste. They knew that real food didn't require fancy recipes or expensive ingredients. They knew that a warm supper mattered, even when you were eating alone. Today, most of these 5-ingredient suppers have vanished. We've forgotten that cooking doesn't have to be complicated to be good. We've lost the knowledge our grandmothers carried, how to turn a can of tuna, a few eggs, a handful of rice into something warm, filling, and dignified. But you can bring them back. Every single one of these 35-ingredient suppers: creamed salmon on toast, sausage and fried potatoes, buttered noodles with eggs, baked beans and toast, corned beef hash, has been saved with full ingredient lists, step-by-step instructions, and historical context on nostalgic eats. You'll find Depression-era recipes, one-bowl dinners, Betty Crocker classics, no-chew suppers, and every forgotten meal we've ever covered, all in one searchable place. No more hunting through old cookbooks or trying to remember how your grandmother made that creamed tuna. No more guessing at measurements or cooking times. Everything is written out clearly, simply, the way it was actually made back then. We've tested these recipes, we've researched the history, we've preserved the techniques your grandmother used so you can cook them exactly the way she did. Stop searching, start cooking. And before you go, tell us, which of these 5-ingredient suppers did your grandmother make when she was living alone? Was it creamed chipped beef, fried bologna and eggs, potato soup? Drop a comment below. Share her memory. Keep her wisdom alive, because the past didn't just cook smarter, it knew how to take care of itself with dignity, one simple 5-ingredient supper at a time.